The default bootloader, Grub, consists of two stages. The first is the small application within the master boot record or the boot sector of the hard disk. The second stage is loaded from the boot partition on your file system. This is the stage that you see when your system boots and you see the Grub menu screen. The first stage of Grub is created during the operating system installation. It exists in the first 446 bytes of the hard disk that contains the boot sector. The first stage is executed by the BIOS, and its purpose is to find the Grub configuration file located at boot grub.conf. Should you ever need to repair a Grub installation, you can do so with the grub install command. The second stage of Grub is located within your boot partition of your file system. If you are using LVM on your system, then the boot file system will be located on a separate partition, since at this point Grub does not support booting from an LVM partition. Let's take a look at our Grub configuration file. At the top, we can see a notice indicating that since we have a boot partition, that Grub was going to refer to our boot hard disk as HD 0,0. If we look below that, we see that our boot disk is our /dev/SDA device. Next, we see a directive for our default boot stanza. The 0 means that we are looking at the very first Grub stanza to boot from. Below this, we see our timeout directive. This value is for the amount of seconds that will pass before the default entry in the grub.conf file gets booted. You can change this value to whatever you want. Let's quickly see what constitutes a Grub stanza. Each stanza begins with the word title. We can see that our first titled stanza is for the CentOS Linux installation, followed by the kernel version number. Below this, we see which hard disk we will boot from. Next, we have our kernel line, showing the file name of the kernel, followed by all of the kernel options that our system will use to boot with. The last line of the stanza is where our initial RAM disk file is located. This is the file that the kernel uses at boot time to load device drivers and initial scripts that are used to start the system up. Below this, we have another stanza containing another kernel version. We will reboot the system so that we can see what else we can do with Grub. Press a key to enter the Grub menu. Here we are presented with the Grub menu. These menu entries are made up from the stanzas that we just saw in the grub.co and initial scripts that are used to start the system up. Below this, we have another stanza containing another kernel version. We will reboot the system so that we can see what else we can do with Grub. Press a key to enter the Grub menu. Here we are presented with the Grub menu. These menu entries are made up from the stanzas that we just saw in the grub.conf file. We can use the arrow keys to select a different kernel to boot from. Just highlight an entry and press the Enter key. We can also edit a kernel entry from the Grub menu to modify how the system boots. Let's try this. Press the A key to modify the booting kernel's arguments. Here we can see the full line of kernel arguments that we saw in the grub.conf file for this kernel. Let's take out the arguments for RHGB, which is short for Red Hat Graphical Boot, and the quiet argument. We are doing this so that we can see all of the system messages during the system boot up that the default progress bar hides from view. Then press the Enter key to boot the system. Now we can see all of the system messages from the kernel while our server boots. You can make changes like this permanent by editing the same information in the grub.conf file. Well, what if you don't want anyone else modifying the Grub menu before a system boots? You can password protect your Grub menu to prevent such modifications. To do this, we use the grub md5 crypt command. Then enter in the password that you want to use to protect your Grub menu. Then, take the md5 hashed password and copy that into our grub.conf file. Enter a new line right above the first title and input the following. Then paste in your encrypted password. Save your file. And now we will reboot our system. We pressed a key to enter our Grub menu, but now we are told to press the P key to enter in a password for us to unlock the other features of Grub. Press the P key, enter in your Grub password, and press enter. And now we can modify the kernel boot arguments. To learn more about Grub, look at the info pages for Grub itself.
अरे अभी तो पैकेज निकाल के रख, अभी जो भी है